Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Vicki Townsend. I am the founder of the Cafe D, and I have the great pleasure of bringing my very dear friend on. Her name is Lina Acosta Sandaal. She is the program director of the Nest in Miami. She is an expert in child and adolescent development and infant and early childhood mental health, having worked and trained at Vista Del Mar, Yale's Minding the Baby, and National Child Traumatic Stress Network and Child Trauma Research Program. You can see why I brought Lina in tonight to talk to us about teens and divorce and how we can, she's going to give us some tips on how we can get it right. Because you know what, Lina, this was such an important category and thing for me because I had teenagers when I got my last divorce. So thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about this conversation because I already know what this is about, and everybody just hang on for your hat. So welcome, Lina.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful to be here today.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're here. This is such an important topic, isn't it? We have such misconceptions of what some of these teenagers' behaviors is all about, don't we?
Yes, definitely. And it's really important to understand, how to get it right, especially in the teenage years.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm looking forward to learning about some ideas that we can give our viewers on how they can get it right from the beginning so that you don't wonder coulda, shoulda, woulda, did I do a good job, was I making a good decision, what does that behavior mean, because you're going to go through all of that. So with that being said, I'm going to let you take this away because you've just got some amazing information for us.
Okay, perfect. So let's see. Let's go through our little slide and think about what we can do when it comes to teenagers. Hold on a minute. I'm having a little bit of an issue with my little PowerPoint situation here. There we go. So we're going to talk about teens and divorce. And, what I want to start off is the way that I want to go through this process is thinking about development. In my work as a therapist, I always see anybody, no matter how old you are, through the lens of development. And we always think about the brain as something that learns, but actually the brain helps us stay alive. And the way that we stay alive and that we make connections is that the brain, as it says here in this quote, the brain needs relationships. And with the attachment figures, which are our parents, our friends, our first relationships, romantic relationships, we learn to shape and grow the brain. So the brain grows to keep us alive, to keep us safe, to keep us connected, but how it does that is in relationship. So it's very important, especially when it is in the situation of divorce, to think about that the brain is being shaped. Now there's something really important to think about adolescence. The brain has plasticity, and now we know that it shifts and changes all the way until the moment of our death. However, there are 2 times in the human development that the brain functions and learns quicker, and that is between the ages of 0 when you're born to 5, and then again between 12 and 24. So remember that if we are growing and changing in development, and especially when our brain is changing, but then we have this rupture in relationship because of a divorce, we have to take into account how is that going to hurt and or help the brain of the adolescent. So this is a little something that I put up in our Twitter account a few months back in December, and it's something that it's a quick way to remember the changes in neurology about children, so in the adolescent years. So I said that that we always call teens lazy, but actually they're not lazy. They're having a neurological shift in sleep. Teenagers need as much sleep as toddlers. They need anywhere between 10 and 12 hours of sleep, and none of them get it. So on the weekends when they stay sleeping until 1 or 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that's because they actually need it. So they're not lazy, their brain is asking them to sleep. They're not irresponsible, they're novelty seeking. So what does that mean? In this age group, the teenager is really, really trying to look into new things and new adventures, so they seek novelty, they seek new things. This is a great time for them to be introduced to maybe traveling or being in new aspects. The one positive, if we can say, about a teenager that is in the middle of a divorce process is perhaps even having the new space in the other parent's home where they can do a different room in a different setting that feeds their novelty seeking. So not everything is a negative when it comes to divorce. And then they're not being disrespectful. They need debate. So what that means is that whenever they come back at you or they are constantly questioning what you're saying, they're not being disrespectful. It's the fact that the prefrontal cortex, which is that area of our brain that takes all the information, it's kind of like the prefrontal cortex is like the judge of the neurological system, and it takes the information from the right brain and the left brain and the amygdala and the hippocampus, and then it makes a choice. That's how we make choices, so all of these other parts of the brain have to function. And the teen between 12 and 24 is building that aspect. So sometimes in divorce situations, we don't want to answer all of their questions, but actually it's appropriate to answer them.
That will be, Lina, that will be that my son will have the world's largest prefrontal cortex on the face of the planet because he was such a debater. We always said, you know, Connor, you take exception with everything. And it's irritating, Lina, because he just questions everything and he has an opinion about everything. And so what you're telling me is that he's not being difficult, he's really just growing his brain.
Exactly. His brain is asking him to do that. It's just that, you know, if every time I'm with my adolescent clients, I tell them, listen, your information is amazing, your delivery is awful. There's no adult. I say there's no adult on the face of the earth that's going to listen to this delivery. So let's work on your delivery because your information is very good. Because if you get around a teenager long enough and you really, really listen to the way that they're seeing the world, because of the changes in the neurology and everything that's happening, so that they will launch, because we want them to launch out and away from our homes so that they can become adults. It's just a magical, wonderful time for adolescents. So let's see this a little bit more closely, all these things that we're talking about. So the novelty seeking. And again, I want to put this kind of thinking about in the context of divorce. So novelty seeking happens due to an increased drive in the reward centers of the brain. The drive makes them want to try new things and engage more in life. Now, the positive in it is, again, they can see being in the, you know, the two parents are separating. One parent is going one way, another parent's going another. You know, maybe one parent ended up in an apartment and the other parent is still in their old home. The novelty-seeking part of their brain will be happy to set up a new space in the new house or the new apartment of, you know, let's say dad that's moved away. However, the novelty seeking, the shadow of it is that the risk centers of the brain, they don't necessarily turn off, but they quiet down. So with novelty seeking of the adolescent, they always look at the positive side of things. You know, every time I'm around adolescents, I think of that song from Monty Python, you know, always look at the bright side of life.
Right.
That's their theme song, you know. So if anything, in a separation or a divorce situation, sometimes because they're looking at the positive of things, it's uncomfortable for the parents to hear them revert back positive things about either the ex and or the situation at the other parent's home, and we have to be careful not to dampen that optimism and that aspect of positivity. And you know, when adolescents look at you and they go, I just didn't think it was that big a deal, they mean it. They mean it because they don't have the risk area of the brain, the amygdala, the hippocampus, that area that gives us information about, you know, what's going on around us. it's a little bit quieter for adolescents. And again, in the case of divorce, we have to think about with the novelty seeking, being in separate houses, being with separate rules, how are they taking that? Either how are they risk taking? And we want them to novelty seek. We don't want them to risk take.
How do you, I'm looking at this picture that you have here, Lina, and you have somebody doing bungee jumping or,
Yes.
you know, like really here. And so when I'm thinking of this, is novelty seeking in the case of adolescents and, young adults, is that also like the, going after and getting a tattoo, maybe experimenting with drugs? Is this that same center? Is that what we're working with here?
Yeah, and that can be, depending on each family. That's the shadow of the novelty seeking. They won't necessarily think about all the positives of all the negatives about trying a new drug, but they'll think about the positives. I'll have fun at the party. My girlfriend will think I'm cool. They'll think about those aspects, and the negative aspects of it. It's illegal. I may get thrown out of school. That kind of gets dampened. So again, if two parents in a divorce situation are not on the same page, right, about curfew or things like that, that's important to speak about, because in this, it's important for them to be able to launch and try new things, but since we as parents are the ones that are holding the risk for them, we have to be able to maintain the boundaries.
So
yes.
And I was actually listening to some statistics today when I was at a conference around collaborative divorce, and they were talking about, some of the statistics around divorced children can be very scary. But it comes to find out that some of these statistics with children that have gone through divorce and that they're more promiscuous and they tend to dabble in drugs and things like that, those were children that were having problems long before the divorce process, right? Those were kids that if a child can get through divorce without doing any of those novelty-seeking things in that shadow space, right? We just have to lead them through, give them novelty-seeking in a positive way as opposed to letting them search out something in a negative way.
Correct. And divorce in itself does not hurt children. And I'll repeat that. Divorce in itself does not hurt children. It's the actions taken by the parents. It's the choices made by the parents. It's the, sometimes, we can't trust the partner, so we put the child in the middle. And if you do that with an adolescent, they are going to reject it because they are naturally rejecting you. That's the other piece. Since the risk areas of the brain are quiet, there's also a part of the hippocampus that's telling them, yeah, you see those people that have been taking care of you all this time? Yeah, don't listen to them. And this happens because if the offspring was continuing to listen to the parent, it would never leave the nest.
Right.
The nest is very comfortable. It's yummy. Somebody pays my rent. Somebody gives me food. Somebody drives me around. Why should I leave? There's no point in leaving. So the brain asking them to seek and look outside of themselves, it's important. When we get into these situations of higher riskier behavior, of promiscuity and drugs and alcohol, some of it is also the legacy prior to the divorce of the fighting and the breakup of the family system prior to the actual separation. Sometimes separation is the best thing that can happen for the children because they have been living in either a war zone or everybody's walking on eggshells.
Right.
So, if you know that your child has been exposed to that prior to the divorce, I would say find them a space where they can go speak to somebody, especially the adolescent, because you always want an adult around. And either an uncle, the priest, the rabbi, a therapist, a teacher, a coach that can really talk to them and give them that adult information that they can hear from this adult but not necessarily from you. And that's also part of novelty seeking. So the next thing that every adolescent needs and needs majorly, and it falls into this idea that they no longer look at the parent for guidance, not necessarily, is the social engagement. Again, if we think the through line of like the task of adolescent is to prepare them to launch, to prepare them to leave the nest, to prepare them to become citizens of the world, you need to have a social group to be safe. You need to have social engagement. This is something that often gets ruptured for teenagers in divorce, primarily because there's always a parent that moves away from the home, and then when they have to go spend the weekends with the other parent, they don't get to be with their social group. So when you are in a divorce situation, you have to respect the social engagements that the adolescents have, the parties, the sporting events at school, the thing, dropping them off at the movies and then picking them up, even if it is your weekend. In adolescence, it's very important, and it's a priority, those social aspects. And sometimes that could be injurious to the adolescents because their social world is very important. And actually, there's an expert in teenagers, and he has a book called The Second Family. And it's all about this, all about the importance of the social world of the adolescent. And that social world, again, can include trusted adults, the priest, the rabbi, the therapist, the teacher, the coach, that helps and guides them and make sure that you have chosen well these external adults that will influence your teenager. So for social engagement, I think the most important rule in divorce is to make sure that each parent is respecting their social world, even if it is your weekend.
Right. So even if, obviously, if you're a parent that's moved outside of the geographical area, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
But maybe they need to have a social world where the new parent, the parent has, not the new parent, but the parent has lived in the new neighborhood. They've got to somehow have a social life there as well.
Yeah. In a perfect world, yes. In a perfect world, maybe a parent has moved, from Miami. One parent's in Miami and the other parent is in Jacksonville. And maybe something becomes available to them, or technology. Sometimes the teenager gets on FaceTime or on Skype, or they're texting with their friends in Miami because they went to visit dad in Jacksonville. Sometimes parents fight that with their adolescents, and my suggestion is please don't, because that is their lifeline. And if you know that you have a volatile situation where you don't really get along with your ex, it's important to get the message somehow as best you can that their social network is very important, because in that moment they're using their friends to take care of one another. My most powerful sessions are when an adolescent tells me, I want to bring my boyfriend, or I want to bring my best friend. There's something beautiful about them supporting one another. And sometimes a best friend knows way more than anybody else. But then, a best friend is also 14 or is also 15.
Right.
So, but they are their support system. So taking that away from them is not appropriate. And it's a necessity for their healthy development.
It makes a lot of sense that they need a social structure to support them as they prepare to launch, because we're actually behind. Do we stay in the house longer than we used to? It seems that way anyway.
Yeah, we do, and the culture has shifted into doing more for them longer than we should. Like There's not a fourth grader in the world that cannot be responsible for their homework. You know, like, because they can
Right.
be developmentally, they can be in charge of their homework and they can fail on their homework. If you're still on top of your adolescent about homework, you've taken it a little too far down development. They should have learned that responsibility between 8 and 10. Do they become lazy
Mm-hmm.
or irresponsible about homework in adolescent? Yes, but they're actually, what they're doing is that, well, they're tired, first of all, because their brain is asking them to sleep, and second, they're debating whether or not this homework is important. And by the way, they're right. There's not a study known to man that correlates better learning with homework. Not one.
Mm-hmm.
So when they get upset about it, and when they get upset that all 5 teachers have given them a project, they're right. And then, you know, that brings us to the next level of adolescence, which is increased emotional intensity. So emotional reactivity is another word for it. Is more intense due to the need to risk take and move into the world. And they need to be highly sensitive because of their need to be out in the world and try new things. So, you know, when you look at an adolescent and they're like, what are you looking at? But you just like looked over to them.
Right, right.
It's like a heightened sense of reactivity. And the best way to describe it, like for like an adult, in the adult world, is when you're sick or you're just sad or you're depressed and somebody looks at you and you filter it in through all those negative feelings that you're having originally, but the
Right.
person is actually just looking at you. Uh, Adolescents feel that most times than not. Like in a 12-hour process when they're awake, at least, you know, 6 hours of that day they feel irritable. And
Why is
again,
that?
that is
Why is that? Is it a hormonal thing? What is causing that?
no, it's a shift. It's a neurological shift. You know, the urban myth that that it's all hormones, it is a myth. Now that we can, now that there has been more studies on the brain, it's less and less about hormones and more about the neurological shifts that are happening. It's just like the toddler. The toddler has 3 tantrums per hour on average. Completely
Wow.
typical and normal. Yeah, 3 tantrums per hour and 1 minor conflict every 3 minutes. That's why like parents of 2.5 to 4.5-year-olds, you know, you gotta hug them and shake their hand because it's super hard to be a parent of a toddler.
That's what they call it, the
You know?
terrible twos, right? The terrible twos.
Yeah, yeah, but it lasts till 4.5. So
The terrible long times.
exactly. So yeah, now they're called three-nagers and four-nados, and there's all these negative labels to them. But
Three nagers and four nagers. Oh, I love that.
so the teenager is also having this high reactivity like the adolescent, and it's a makeup of autonomy. It's the need for the brain to assess and be highly sensitive to everything in the surroundings. And one of the things that we use to understand whether we're safe or not is to pick up on the energy in the room. It's called affect. So you and I feel affect when we go to a party and we walk into the room. You can feel the energy of what's happening there. Or when you ask a friend, hey, how are you doing? And they say, fine. But their body and the energy says, I'm dying,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
In the toddler and the adolescent, that aspect of the right hemisphere of the brain is heightened. So but sometimes they misread. It's like, but they're constantly like kind of reading your face and reading your response. And it is a makeup of like, I need to be independent, I need to be autonomous, and I need to be hyper aware of everything around me. So they're hyper aware of the emotional state, but then most of the time they respond with irritability or heightened emotion. Because when we do that, we get into action quicker. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's very interesting. This is so fascinating. I messed up. I feel like I messed up a lot because, you know, like even with my son, with the debater, and he's calmed. He's 20 now, but even at 20, he's not as bad as he used to be, but he still takes exception and he still debates. I think I should have been celebrating that as opposed to trying to get that to stop, right?
Yes,
because that's a good thing.
It's a very good. It's a very, very good thing, and a way, again, sometimes parents get worried that something's wrong because of the divorce, because the teenager is highly reactive, but sometimes they're just being adolescent, and it's just normative.
Has nothing to do with the divorce at all. So we take that guilt because we are so guilty about this whole process, but we take all of that and assume all of this is about the divorce, and a lot of this is just about them being teenagers.
Correct. So one more time to go back, it's not just the divorce. It's not just divorcing that hurts children. No. It's how we handle it. It's how we speak to them about it. It's how we take into account their development, their personality, because everybody's born with a particular type of temperament, right? And because a child is development, personality, and the circumstances that surround them. It's not just personality and the circumstances around them. So the circumstances around the teenager with divorce, they're not 100% positive, but development is a big chunk of who we are. I have a bad habit of meeting people and going, you're about 14, even though they're 52. Because we development is like a video game, you go through different levels, and then you go to the next level. There's certain things that you have to master, and then you go to the next level. The difference between development and a video game is that you can go to the next level lacking some of the things that you were supposed to master in the first level. But then that begins to slow you down, right?
Right.
I always tell parents, if you understand development, you're like 70% of your parenting issues will disappear.
That's why this conversation tonight is so important, because I didn't understand that so much of what was going on with my son was just something that would have gone on had he stayed in an intact family.
Yes, it would have happened anyway.
Right.
It was adolescence, and this is my favorite aspect of adolescence, and when I have my adolescent client with me, they always inspire me and keep me reminded, I have my space, but it's still a small business, and every once in a while, it's hard. They're always seeing the world through a brand new lens, they are constantly exploring and testing, and they will take a concept that we all take for granted and look at it in 3 different aspects in different ways. And if every adolescent parent can take away the quote, "because I said so," out of their vocabulary, a lot of the problems that they have with their teen would be completely gone. Because what they're doing is debating and exploring and taking what you gave them in their first 12 years. You got to get those values in the first 12 years, and then questioning it. And this is the part that's hard as a parent of a teenager, because you see and you recognize that they're questioning you.
Right.
But it's appropriate. And when it comes to divorce, that questioning gets heightened, because all children, no matter what age group they are, the one thing that they do feel during divorce is that they have the experience of loss of prediction, loss of routine, loss of a loved one. Because although they still have their mother and their father, they don't have it in the way that it used to be. And when they begin in creative exploration, or the shadow of creative exploration when it comes to divorce, is that they may completely reject the family, 100%, because they don't want to feel the loss of it.
Oh, that's interesting.
So you have to be careful in that time.
Is that something that happens often, Lina? That they reject the family as a whole, the whole thing, just because they don't want to deal with it? Is that something that comes up a lot?
That, I think that is more common than drugs and alcohol and promiscuity.
Really?
Yeah, because what we do as human beings, Freud used to say we're pleasure seekers, and he's partly right. It's not just about sex. It's just about making attempting to feel as comfortable as possible within our own skin. And sometimes if we haven't given the space for the teenager to feel the loss, to debate about it, to try new things with each of the parents in their novelty seeking, or to be highly emotionally reactive because of the loss, then when they begin to question who they whether or not they're going to take on your values, they may just reject them altogether because it pains them too much to accept it because it's broken.
How can you help them, Lina? Yeah, how do you help them through that?
Well, the task at hand is to create a new narrative. And this is key in any age group. To say, yes, we used to be a family, and yes, we used to go to Aspen once a year, but now we've become different. And then I would challenge the parent of a teenager going through divorce to think about all the markers. I'm like, okay, so the novelty seeking, how can it be different? How can we build a different way of seeing ourselves as a family? And having that discussion with them. And then, when they get passionate or emotional responding to it, not shutting it off and going, hey, 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 but saying, wow, you're really upset, you're really angry, and describing to them what you hear back in the narrative. And then let's explore together how we could be a new type of family. And just kind of always, if you could see it through these characteristics of development and work with them rather than against them, because a lot of the time in adolescence as parents we work against them rather than with them, you could walk through that. And it's always good to talk about the elephant in the room. Always. Listen, I'll save you money from a therapist. That's what we do. We talk about the elephant in the room. That's all. We're brave, and we sit and we go, so you really don't want to feel the hurt that you feel about your parents splitting up, but let's talk about it. And then the person, and that's all we do. I mean, in a nutshell, maybe other therapists would disagree with me, but I think that's what I do. And as a therapist, I talk about the elephant in the room. I'm a tour guide in somebody's emotional psyche, and I go, hey, have you looked at this? Have you wondered about this? And I'm also, as a therapist, but I believe that if parents could do this with their children, it's better that they do it than I do it, which is to sit in the dark with the child. To sit in the dark and to show them that they can survive the pain of the loss of the divorce, and that they don't have to reject the family as a whole. Because sometimes we reject things because we feel that we can't feel them. So this is kind of like the motto here at the Nest. It's like parenting is hard sometimes, so stop doing it alone. My suggestion to parents that are going through the divorce process, my suggestion for parents that have teenagers in this process is speak to them, debate with them, allow them to discuss with, always make space, whether it's the car confessional, they're sitting with you in the car, nobody's looking at anybody but you're talking. Or just, there's studies that show that just having dinner with your adolescents decreases their use of drugs and alcohol by, I don't remember the statistic right now, but it's pretty high. Just wow. Dinner. And in my belief system, because I always think about development, I think because when we sit with them and when we talk to them, we're building their brain and we're helping them relate and we're helping them grow. Remember the initial quote, you know, we learn and our brain learns and grows within the attachment, within the relationships of parent-child, child-friend, child, you know, love relationship. So these are all the kind of things that we have to hold in mind.
You know, all of these things, because all of this was new to me when I heard it from you, Lina, and it makes so much sense. Why is nobody talking about this in the divorce? I mean, had I known that the arguing and the debating, I call it arguing, and you know, some people would say he just takes exception to everything. If I had known that that was a very positive thing and that that was a part of just his neurological growth and his growth as a teenager, I would not have been nearly as upset and as combative. Not, and I don't mean that in a physical way, but you know, we were just like always kind of picking at each other and always like on each other, and I would have embraced it as opposed to have argued about it and, you know, done the I said because I said so kind of thing. I would have really engaged with him more. And, you know, even the novelty seeking, I wish that I had encouraged that more. Like you said, take them on trips, take them, you know, turn them on to new things. And get their brain developing in the way that you want it to, because they're going to seek, if you don't do it for them, or if they're not around positive influences, is that where that negative, what you call the shadow of novelty seeking, which is that experimentation with drugs and sexual promiscuity and those types of things, come from not having the positive novelty seeking things like decorating a new room, you know, living in a new place, finding out the new stuff around, you know, the new apartment. Those types of things is a really great idea. And this is such a path to a happy and healthy young adult, isn't it?
100%. And I think, you know, sometimes as a culture, we get stuck in only seeing the negative. You know, Carl Jung was the first one. You know, that's not my term, but Carl Jung, who was, you know, Jung and Freud, he always spoke about the shadow and the light. We are shadow and light, you know, yin yang. We really are. Every, you know, if we don't feel sadness, then we can't really honor happiness. We have to have both. So I always tell parents, you know, if there's negativity or shadow in front of you, try to slow down, maybe not in the moment. You may not be able to do it in the moment, but later, and look at the light of it. What were they telling you? What the behavior tells us a story. Behavior behavior in our children, no matter what age they are, always tells us a story. I mean, one of my favorite talks that I do is that I do new parenting trends for grandparents. And I love doing that talk because these are parents that are, you know, 30 years old, you know, because I always tell parents you're as old, your parenting age is the age of your oldest child. So here I am, I'm a 9-year-old parent sitting with a 32-year-old parent. But I tell them, what behavior is your child showing you now? And the parent tells me she doesn't want me to have anything to do with her parenting. I'm like, exactly. And it's just like when they went to kindergarten, and it's just like when they went to college, and now they're doing it again, and it's another childhood transition. But let's look at the positive in that. And most of the time we get stuck on just looking at the negative. So for me, and why, you know, in the work that I do with parents, why I think development is so important, because development tells us exactly what is happening. Then, so we understand what is happening in general, and then we can bring it to our child. So for your son, the one developmental marker that was strongest was his creative exploration and his debating.
Right, absolutely.
He was truly, and he still is, truly exploring, who am I? What am I? Why am I? Who are you? And why are you? And if you could have seen it like that, then it's your opportunity to go, well, this is why I gave you that value, honey, and what are you thinking about that value now? Imagine the conversation. You could still have these conversations now as well, Vicki. You know, it's because that's what they are doing. Who am I? You know, it's like Hamlet, you know.
Right.
Adolescence is like
Yeah.
it's like Hamlet is adolescence basically, you know, and that's why I love being around 12 to 24-year-olds, especially like 12 to 24-year-olds are entrepreneurs. They are ready to take on the world, and sometimes the adults around them stifle it. I'll leave you with this, whether you're in a divorce situation or not. When children under the age of 12 and raising them is a parent in a boat in the ocean. And sometimes the ocean is calm and sometimes the ocean is choppy, but you are guiding this boat. When adolescence hits, between 12 and 24, the parent gets out of the boat and goes into the lighthouse. And then the child goes back out into the choppy waters, into the calm waters, but the lighthouse always has to be there to bring them home. But you can't move. They have to be running the boat. Because if you
Wow.
get in the boat with them, then you're telling them, you can't, I can. And you can't be a citizen of the world if somebody else is telling you what to do.
That was what a beautiful visual that is. Oh my gosh, I love that. That gives it, you know, so you really think, Lina, that at 12 years of age we need to be giving our children a lot more responsibility so that we can kick them out, you know, and launch them from our nest, right? That's why I love that that's the name of your business, The Nest, because you're trying to help us get our children to be successful enough, because the last thing we want is a child that cannot launch and leave the nest.
Yes.
That is not a functional citizen of the world, as you put it. So
yeah.
we want them to be able to go and to grow.
Right.
And that was a beautiful allegory or analogy. I liked that very much.
And again, if we think of it through the lens of divorce, you know, in a really positive situation, there's two lighthouses.
Yeah.
And again, shadow and light, right? The shadow of divorce, okay, it's a ruptured family, but the light of it is that, you know, there's two different ways of seeing the world. There's an opportunity for them to see two people that took a look into their lives and decided to make a change for themselves because they needed to grow. You know, we model way more by what we do than what we say to our children, and in particular to an adolescent, because teenagers are always paying attention. So the quick and dirty on teenagers and divorce, make sure that you are giving them positive novelty seeking, and again, when in a divorce situation, just the makeup of it, the change of the family, it's actually more of a positive than a shadow. You know, when it comes to the creative exploration, the debate, when sometimes as parents of divorce, we don't want to talk about the loss, we don't want to talk about the difficulty, but for teenagers, it's appropriate to talk about it, to say, hey buddy, you know, I noticed that, you know, so kick in the emotional reactivity. Maybe they come in and you see them, they walk into your house and they are just in a mood. At that point, you have to tell yourself, okay, the crazy lady from the nest said emotional reactivity. I'm going to take a moment and not go over there because that bomb is going to explode. You're going to give them time. When they come out from their cave, you're going to go, hey, buddy, I noticed that you were really kind of frustrated or irritated when you came back from Dad's house. You know, I'm here if you want to talk about it.
Oh, that's good advice. Well, Lina, I have some questions here that have come
Yes.
in, and I'm wondering if they're not necessarily following the topic at hand, but there are definitely questions that I'm sure that you can help some of our listeners and our viewers with. So the first one was, what do I do when they don't want to go to their father or mother's house?
Okay, so first and foremost, debate. Listen to the reasons why they don't want to go, and then you give them a little bit of the reality checking, right? Because most times than not, we have to follow a court-appointed situation, and there isn't a choice. But just the mere fact that you're listening to them and you're saying, listen, I'm really sorry, that, and I honor what you're feeling, but this is kind of, my hands are tied. And saying to them, okay, so this is how you're feeling when you're over there, but let's think about, so then you can go into helping them have creative exploration. How can it be easier? How can it be better? Because most times we go, listen, there's nothing I can do, just you have to go. I can't deal with, I have a divorce decree. And we respond that way because we don't want to have the conversation. So you can use their creative exploration and their need for debate to really listen to them and then help them think through what they can do to feel better in the other house. And again, as citizens of the world, sometimes we have to do things that we don't want to do.
Right, right. What about, here's another one. They are screaming that they hate me and want to go and leave, go with the other parent. What do I do?
One more time. So that would be an emotional reactivity moment. So as the parent, you have to hold, okay, they have emotional reactivity. So I have to hold that in mind. First, label, you're really angry with me right now. Take a moment to calm down and then we can discuss it. No, I don't feel like it. Because they're just like toddlers, they're having a tantrum. But honor what they're feeling. Most times in divorce situations, because we feel uncomfortable, we're like, fine, go. But that's the last thing you want to do, because in that moment they're just having the teenage emotional reactive moment. But in their situation, they can actually leave.
Right, right, exactly. They're not little ones anymore.
No, and so they're having the emotional reactivity, but they have the choice, right, because of the divorce, to actually leave. Like that, it's not a fantasy. Like when teenagers have parents that are together and one is stricter than the other, they have the fantasy of like being done with them. The teenager doesn't have a fantasy. They can actually choose to go live with dad.
That's true. That's very true.
So the regular kid has the same fantasy when they're feeling highly reactive and emotional, but they don't have the option. This teen does, and that's why they're screaming that. It's just problem solving. It's part of their debating system. So the task at hand is not to take it personal. Remember that it's emotional reactivity and go, you're really angry at me right now. Please don't scream at me. Take a moment and we'll discuss it later.
I'm sitting there, so now I've seen the debate side with my son, and the emotional reactivity probably from my daughter, not necessarily directed at me, just in the moments of things that maybe she got overwhelmed by some things.
Mm-hmm.
That now I'm looking at things, golly, I'm looking at things so much differently. So there's, labeling these things and then honoring what they're feeling. That's so important. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
And we all love that. We all love to be seen. At Oprah's, weekend, she said something beautiful that so resonated with me because it's my experience as well. She said that no matter who she had interviewed, whether it was Obama or the Dalai Lama or, think of a big person. I mean, she named a bunch of them. And what she shared with the audience was they all asked, was that good?
Yeah, yeah. They wanted to know that they too were good, that it was acceptable.
Yeah, and that they were seen.
Right.
Was that good? Was that helpful? We all want to be seen. And let's go back to the original quote. The brain needs relationship to grow. And that is a version. So a teenager going, I hate you, you're awful. They're, in that moment, if you go, stop it, you're not seeing them.
Ah, interesting.
You're not seeing, first, the developmental part of it. They're emotionally reactive. There's a part of them that just can't hold it. Two, you're not seeing the humanity in them. They're really upset with you, and you have to wonder, okay, why? And sometimes it's just because they want to go to the party and they want to stay there till 3 o'clock in the morning, and you said no. And, you know, they don't have to be, okay, mother, I will stay. You know, then nobody's going to say that. They're upset. They're teenagers. They're not adults. They can't say, thank you very much. You know, even us, like our boss tells us something, and, you know, some of us quit, including myself.
Right. Oh, and I have a girlfriend who quit from a very, very, you know, a huge figure paying job on an emotionally reactive moment. And
Yes.
yeah, wow. Yeah, that, so it doesn't necessarily go away when you get out of the 20s, right?
No, no, we all have those aspects of our brain. It's just for them, it's on overdrive. For us, it's kind of, hopefully, if we've gone through the developmental marker, has calmed down. But we all know, you know, I've been at the bank and seen a 13-year-old in a 52-year-old body.
Well, here's one about the ex. This is an interesting question. The homework and responsibilities never get done over at my ex's house. Now what?
That is probably the most common question. And then this is an opportunity. So for three things. One, for creative exploration and debate with your adolescent. So, and to tie in kind of like emotional reactivity and the process of like when they get so tired, because they truly do get tired. So, like I said before, by the time your child is in 4th grade, homework needs to be their responsibility. But that's really hard to do because, you know, in the current culture of the college system, you know, we're always afraid that they're not going to make it and they're not going to do it and they're going to fail and, oh my God, and it's the end of the world. So for this, it's an opportunity to say, okay, let's have a discussion. Because if this situation is happening, it's usually because it's kind of volatile and you know the two parents are not actually co-parenting. They're usually not communicating with one another, because most parents that kind of co-parent, they kind of do and they're discussing with one another. It's pretty similar, not 100%, but it's pretty similar. And usually in this situation, it's kind of like the volatility between the two parents, or one parent is just so busy that they're not even bothering, right?
Right.
So in this situation, we go back to the adolescent and having a discussion. And I kind of keep saying the same thing in my response, but I say the same thing because it's very important. Most of us talk at teenagers instead of talking with them. And it's very important to talk with them. So it's saying, this is the expectations of the school. This is the expectations of your teacher. These are my expectations, and these are Dad's expectations. Which one of these feel closest to you when you're not overwhelmed, when you're not overwhelmed or tired, or you're just not like fed up? Because sometimes homework, you just feel tired and fed up and frustrated. So of these expectations, which one fits you best? And your child may tell you, you know, that social studies teacher is just, she gives me tons of homework and then she never checks it. And she never gives me my paper back. If you get in it with your ex, you know, then you kind of put the kid in the middle, because some of the homework situation is really the responsibility of this adolescent.
Right.
And I'm a firm believer in natural consequences for teenagers. Because remember that their risk part of their brain is kind of turned off. And sometimes only natural consequences are the one that turns it on. And those become like building blocks for becoming citizens of the world. Sometimes we save them way too much, and we have become a culture of saving teenagers a lot.
Helicopter parents for sure. In my kids' school, there was a ton of them.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story. There was valedictorian of his class, got into the college of his choice, went there, failed out his first semester. Why? He didn't have his manager.
His mom, his dad,
his parents. He never learned to manage his own work. He was sent out into the world without learning everything that he needed to know.
Interesting.
And sometimes we do that. So in that scenario, it's a discussion with the adolescent, but I would say point out, this is what's expected by the school. This is what's expected by the teacher. This is what's expected from me, and this is what's expected from that. So what are you doing? You're doing that part of them exploring, this is what the adults are giving me, who am I? Who do you want to be? With adolescents, always give them, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, and then work backwards. My husband is a high school teacher, and he does this project every year with the seniors because at this time of the year, all of the seniors are they've already gone into college and they're kind of tapped out.
They've got senioritis.
Right, and he does this project that I've always thought, I'm like, wow, that's awesome, and I had nothing to do with it, so I give him full credit. He tells them, all right, guys, so your parents threw you out of the house. You have zero money. How are you going to get an apartment? How are you going to get clothes? How are you going to get food? Okay, get on Google, figure it out. Okay. And then he makes them go through the process, right? So, like, recently, one of his students was like, well, we're going to go to the homeless shelter, and we're going to save up our money. And I was like, wow. Like, so again, like, he hears, like, responses. Or one of the girls found a $700 two-bedroom apartment, and then my husband was like, okay, do Google Earth on that. Do you see that gate? How high is that gate? Do you think that two young girls can live in that neighborhood? I mean, that's a really good price, but do you think, and then he makes them look for jobs, and it's a really beautiful process of, like, working through and giving and reality checking with them. Because remember, the risk areas of their brain are turned off. So in this scenario where at dad's house that rule is not set, we have to wonder with them, do you want to follow that rule at dad's house? And do you want to part of your grading period not get the grade that you want? Because in your 5-year plan, you're telling me that you want to be a graphic designer. Okay. Right. But how is this going to affect your graphic design? And their response, because their risk areas of the brain are off, is going to be, it's not that big a deal. And then you're going to go, okay, but let's think it through, because you're going to debate with them.
Here's one that's kind of tough. My child is depressed because my ex says that they will come and get them, my children, but he doesn't show up. How do I handle this?
That one is a tough one. Because, that is abandonment and rejection from the one person,
Lina?
Yeah, hi.
There you are. Sorry, I missed you for a minute.
So it's and that kind of, in the shadow of emotional reactivity is that they can get wrapped up in that depression and that anxiety and just spin on it. So that's another, that, most, and you have to be careful, because you also can't badmouth your ex, because that's their father. So for that situation, it's, my recommendation, if you can, is talking to them and imagining, what would it be like for you to write a letter or to speak to your dad about the situation? Because that's an esteemable act if they can speak up for themselves about their disappointment. That's an opportunity for social engagement. In a situation where they were planning to see their parent, but the parent didn't show up, it's an opportunity to go, okay, I can talk to you, or do you want your friends to come over this evening, and just kind of really holding them in the space of, it's okay and it's not about you.
Right. Absolutely.
And in that situation, know that depression and anxiety is it gets heightened because of that emotional reactivity. So you always have to be, you have to look at, what choppy waters are they getting into when it comes to that.
You mentioned, you said this is an esteemable act. Do you mean this is something that can help them build their self-esteem?
Yes.
That's interesting. Is there, so I agree, standing up and learning to stand up for themselves. Can you give us maybe 2 or 3, and then we'll end this on that note about how we can help our teens build their self-esteem?
Well, first, pointing out what they do right. We tend to point out to our children what they do wrong most times than not. And not pointing out like, oh, good job. More like describing what they've done. Wow, I watched you talk to your friend. I heard a little bit of how you were talking to your friend, and it sounded like you were being very supportive. They must have felt so wonderful when you did that. So describing situations where you find that they were doing something that either falls under your value system that you've been trying to share with them, and continuing to tell them what they're doing right. Because remember, the pleasure principles of their brain that are turned on will really eat that up, and that builds esteem. Helping them to listening to them in their debate and not shutting it off is an esteemable act. In that moment, they're being seen. In that moment, they're being heard, and in that moment, they're able to work that out with you. So, like, I think it's harder for Asian and Latino parents to listen to teenagers because they're so rude. and that's their image, like that's their immaturity. Like we forget that they're young. And they have yet to learn how to debate with you. But an esteemable act for an adolescent is to hear them debate and to go, okay, I hear what you're saying, but let's try to use different terms because it's hard for me to hear when you call somebody stupid. Rather than saying, please don't say stupid.
Right.
Because they're saying that because they're just being passionate and expressive, and they don't necessarily know how. So an esteemable, the tolerating, right? Tolerating the debate is you building their esteem because they will feel seen and heard. Oh. And it doesn't mean it doesn't mean you have to agree with them. And that's, I think sometimes parents get confused. You don't have to agree with them. You just have to go, okay, I hear what you're saying, but these are my points. And then they'll come back with your points. And then you're going to say, I hear you, I understand you, however, I'm keeping this boundary.
That's a good one. So point out what they're doing right, listening to them in their debate. Is there one more thing that you can give us before we say goodbye?
Statistically, and this is for girls, and I think it's important for girls because that the time when girls give up on their point of view, the time when girls give in to relationship rather than their individuality is between the ages of 10 plus. So statistically it shows that when most female CEOs played sports.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah. Is that interesting?
Yeah.
So, and I think that it works because as women and as girls, we're always told to be nice. We're like the culture tells us, be nice, be sweet, be pretty. And sometimes when a girl gets into sports, she hears the message that the boys hear, which is be strong, right? Be powerful, be committed. Our culture does that to our children. It's a high price to pay to be initiated into being a woman in our culture. And we have to fight against it. as parents of girls. So esteemable things is things like that. If they're interested in the arts, give them space to do the arts, because that's something esteemable. You know, auditioning for a play and getting it is esteemable.
Right.
Even if they don't make it, they learn from it. I remember I was called to do, they do the voice kids in Spanish levels, and we were called in as therapists because we kind of had to like have an intervention, because all the parents, it dawned on all the parents that most of their children were going to not get in.
Oh, boy.
And they wanted to pool all of their kids.
Oh.
So we got called in like as an emergency, like, oh my God, we need a therapist here to process this with the parents, and even the judges were feeling really guilty about not letting the kids win, and it was just a mess. And the message for me was, you have already done an esteemable act by allowing your child to be part of this process. Whether they're successful or they risk, they took an amazing risk. They went through a hoop of following a dream, and this is not failure. It's how you pose it.
Fail forward is what I always say. Fail forward, because if you don't fail, you haven't done anything. You haven't moved.
Correct. And you know, I'm gonna not do it justice, but you know, it's like if what is it? I think it's Thomas Jefferson or something. One of them said something like, you know, I've only not gotten it right 100,000 times or something like that, rather than I haven't failed.
Edison, when he was creating the light bulb, said that he, I forget how many attempts he made. It's thousands and thousands, and it wasn't until the last one. You know what? Here's another one. You know the cleaning product called Formula 409?
Yes.
Have you ever heard of that? Okay,
yes.
Do you know why it's called Formula 409? Because the Formula 408 from 1 to 408 didn't work. And it was it's true. It was finally Formula 409, the 409th try, that they nailed it.
That's it, and that's exactly right. So for esteemable, allow them to follow their dreams, allow them to fall. Because when we fall, we learn and we grow. And so that's something else that's important. Failure is necessary for growth.
Lina, do you have a last slide with how to contact you?
I do.
Let's put that up there, because I think that's very important, because I'm so impressed with everything that, once again, I'm learning so much from you, and I've heard this before, so it's not like I'm new to this, and yet today I've got 2 pages of notes. I can't wait to put it out there. I do want to put together a little worksheet so that the people that are listening to this will have it, because this was fascinating information, and you are just amazing. You're here. You're in South Miami, right?
Yes.
But you work, Lina, you can work with people over the phone, can't you?
I do Skype, and then I have a subscription service, so you don't actually have to be in Miami to talk to me. It's a private Facebook group. Every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, I get on the phone, I talk 20 minutes on a topic, and then the floor opens up to whomever's on the line. Sometimes there's 2 people, sometimes there's 20 people, and the first 10 get to come in and ask questions. And if somebody raises their hand, you know, in the call, I turn it on and I answer their question. So you get me every Tuesday at 1 o'clock, which I thought was a great time, because if you're a stay-at-home mom, your baby's sleeping, and if you're a working mom, you can take your lunch break, and you know, so it's a good time, and you have that, and then all the calls get recorded, so then people can listen to it. So that's a great way to get access to the information here. And then the Facebook group, you know, it's families that have taken the groups here at the center. We call it couture parenting. We get to know you, we get to know your child, and then we individualize the help. That's why it's couture, like a beautiful couture dress.
Oh, I love that idea. I love that branding.
So yeah, so Nest Parents Online is really a good way to get access to all of this information. And the Facebook group is fun because, you know, sometimes I can't sleep at 2 o'clock and I'll go on the line and see who asked a question and I just answer it.
And we want you to do that for us from time to time, because we too have a private Facebook page, and we have all sorts of different professionals that will go through there and peruse some questions. So we want to encourage everybody, if you're on this webinar, then you have access to our private Facebook page. So we want you to get in there, ask some questions, and if they're uncomfortable questions, maybe you can contact Lina at info@thenestmiami.com and call them at 305-392-0788. And so this does not end the conversation. And Lina, you and I are going to do another webinar, aren't we? Because we want to take this around about small children.
Yes.
And right, and talk about that, because that's the same but different, right? And we've
Correct.
got, you know, my children were 10 and 6. And so like I say, I wish I had had this, and that's why I did the Cafe D. Honestly, it's because I did it on a wing and a prayer. I did it with my gut and my, you know, my head sometimes and my heart. And sometimes I was right and sometimes I was wrong. And I feel like if I could help somebody that was in the same situation that I am, not make the mistakes that I did. Not that, listen, I'm grateful. My children have turned out to be such wonderful, wonderful young adults, and I'm grateful for every minute of everything that I've learned from them and that they've learned from me. Do I wish that their life had been different? I don't know that I can even go down that path, because it wasn't. So what good does wishing that do me? But the one thing that I do wish was that I had had resources like the Cafe D to go into and to find out some of the things about raising kids, about the money side of it, and about the healing side. So we've got all of that there for you. So if you're listening to this, you have access to that. Please check us out on our Facebook page at thecafed.com. What is your Facebook page, Lina?
It is Nest Parents Online is one of our pages. Oh, our Facebook is Nest Miami. Sorry, the Nest Miami. We're
The Nest Miami? The Nest Miami? Right, and we are
the Nest Miami. Yeah.
Yeah, and we are thecafed.com. And on that, I am going to wish you all a good evening. Lina, thank you so much. You are so awesome, and I have absolutely loved every minute of this. And I am going to take everything that you've written today. I'm going to try and put it into a worksheet for everyone, so it'll be available in our members area. So again, thank you, Lina. Thank you so much. The Nest Miami is so amazing, and you are just so generous with your time here. So thank you so much, and I'm going to wish you good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.